Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the CB vlog right here on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you are really liking the show, check out our Patreon, patreon.com/commandersbrew. You can help us make these episodes, and we would really love it. But otherwise, let's get to today's topic.
Okay, this topic this week, we're talking about sack outlets. What's the deal with sack outlets?
What is the deal?
Right. We talk about sack outlets from time to time. It comes up from time to time, but we don't always say this, and I think it's important. We should assume that every deck should have a sack outlet in it. We talk about ramp is important. We talk about card draw. We talk about removal. But we don't always use this kind of card category in the same discussion. I think graveyard hate gets mentioned more often than sack outlets, and I would contest that. Man, a sack outlet, you gotta have a sack outlet, and we're gonna kind of go over the pros and more pros of it. There are not many cons of a sack outlet, and then just some of our favorites in different types.
Yeah, obviously sack outlets are something you're going to look to have if you are running a creature-based strategy, which I think most people are running. The majority of your decks are going to revolve around some number of creatures, including your commander, obviously. I mean, there obviously are some that do not, but this is where that's going to fall into. We're talking about sacrificing creatures specifically. There are a thing or two that let you sacrifice other things, which can also be beneficial, but here we're focusing on creatures, obviously.
Yeah, and even if your deck isn't all about sacrificing, a lot of decks will have, the aristocrat style of thing where sacking creatures gets you benefit. Even if that's not your goal, we still believe it is an important part. You should devote at least one card slot to a sack outlet.
Yeah, definitely. It just benefits you to do so in those types of strategies, obviously. And even in those colors, we're talking about... I guess we can kind of mention right off the top here what kind of colors we're looking at when it comes to sack outlets for creatures. It does range across the color pie if we're looking at things like artifacts and things like that. But if you're talking about what colors benefit the most, obviously black is a very big one. You're going to find most of the creature-based sack outlet in black. White has its fair share, and so does red and green. Blue is kind of the only one that kind of misses out on sacrificing creatures, whether it be on creatures or enchantments or things like that. But even that, I think you might even find an occasional Dimir based blue-black sack outlet. But generally speaking, it's the other four colors. Blue's kind of the other one that gets the shaft a bit.
Yep. Too bad.
That's a shame. But guess what? Every other color has it, and then if blue wants it, there are artifacts that are readily available for it.
And lands.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. Yeah, colorless lands. Totally. So why do we want these effects in our non-graveyard / sacrifice-based strategies? Why should I put this in my sort of normal, why should I put this in a Simic deck that doesn't really care too much about the graveyard? Well, for one thing, if you've got a lot of control magic type effects running around your meta, this is a very easy way to combat that. If you have a commander like a Marquesa or one of the other ones that is the active strategy is to use your opponent's creatures, take them off the battlefield. Well, sack outlets are going to prevent that from happening. And it's just, obviously you're going to be able to get them in your graveyard where you're still going to have at least some amount of control over where they go.
Yeah, I mean, it can be very frustrating. It's one of those things, it's just the psychology of Magic, right? Getting a creature destroyed is fine. Getting a creature countered, although technically identical almost. I know you can find examples where that's not the same, but functionally the same, it just feels a bit worse. But getting your creature stolen feels the worst. So if anything, you can just prevent that, right? No one can have your stuff at this time. It's you can guarantee that.
People hate getting their creatures stolen, and it will make you not play creatures. It will absolutely stop creatures from being played on the board if you have a repeatable way to steal creatures.
Oh my goodness. Can I throw a tangent here? I read a Reddit post on I think it was on the EDH subreddit. Someone was like, hey, I only have a Wicked Stacks deck, and my playgroup hates it, and they're mad. So I want to make a different deck that isn't Stacks, that everyone won't hate so much. Here's my idea. A deck that only uses other people's stuff by stealing everything they own. And then everyone was like, It's like, that's not going to make it better, dude.
No, that's not going to help. That's the type of deck that will only be fun for you to play ever once, maybe. Everyone's going to hate you so much. I remember the last time we played against a Mariki Reed Barrett deck, and all it did was steal creatures and then like untap Mariki and kill them and all this kind of stuff. And it was just such a groaner of a game because no one played creatures, and we all just sat there and waited.
Yeah.
I believe we did beat that player, but still, that'll prevent that sort of stuff from happening, kind of, right? Because you still are killing your creature, which might not necessarily be good, but it's great to prevent something like a big where they steal all the creatures. What's that card called again?
Oh, Insurrection.
Insurrection, right? If you're living in fear of Insurrection a lot, you'll find sack outlets are quite good. One thing I like, one of my favorite things about sack outlets is the ability to stop an exile effect.
Yes.
So if something is going to target one of your creatures and it's going to exile them, and they, maybe this is a creature you really it's important to your board state, and you've protected it in other ways, perhaps indestructible things like that. But exile is just going to be able to take care of it. Sack outlets are key, and it's also really good. And people will see in the upcoming deck tech, or if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see in the deck tech we posted earlier. Running like having a graveyard strategy seems to go it's counterintuitive to run exile effects like as your board wipes, but if you have enough sack outlets, they actually are even better because you get to sack all your creatures in response to your own board wipe and exile everyone else's. That's the amount of flexibility that a sack outlet can give you in that case.
Yeah, for sure. You get to decide whether or not you would rather them in exile or the graveyard, in case you're worried about reanimation from your opponents as well. Like that's also part of the equation, but it gives you more control. And there's a side case as well that doesn't come up too often, but every now and then there's like a spell that like says destroy target creature, draw a card, for example. I'm talking about spells that target a creature and have a bonus side effect. Like maybe you get to make a token copy of that creature or something like that. Or maybe your creature does damage to all your other creatures. Whatever it does, by sacking a spell's only target, aka that creature, that whole spell fizzles, so the caster doesn't get any of those bonus abilities that they were going to get from it.
Yeah, something like a quasi-duplicate from Guilds of Ravnica. Like you can sacrifice it in response, and then they don't get the copy of it. I mean, actually, that's quasi-duplicate only targets your own stuff. I never mind.
Right,
but that's sort
something
of effect,
something like a supplant form, maybe.
Yes,
like,
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, then your opponent won't get that copy of the creature.
Yeah, totally. So definitely, you can see that there's value in running these things. It is kind of meta dependent. Like if you never see any of these things we're talking about, I guess it's not quite as important. But I'd still advise that running a sack outlet or two is going to be helpful, not only because of these things we're mentioning, but the actual sack outlets themselves can give you value, right? They can give you effects for when you sacrifice a creature. No, I mean, there's many different ones, and we're going to get to them when we talk about some of our favorite cards. But what is important in a sack outlet other than just being a sack outlet itself? What are some things we want to see here?
One of the most important factors in a sack outlet is what it costs to sack it. The best sack outlets by function will be ones that don't cost any mana and don't require a tap. So you can just freely sack anything you want. You'll never get caught off guard. You can tap out. It doesn't matter. You'll always be able to protect your stuff.
Yeah, it only strikes me now that if for some reason people are listening and like, what's sack? Sacrifice. Did we say that?
Oh, I don't think we ever did. We just calling it sack outlets. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone, sacrificing creatures. But I'm pretty sure you've probably picked up on that if you're listening and didn't know that at first. So absolutely. because the sacrificing of the creature is a cost in and of itself, which is why it can't really be it can't be like responded to in the way you might normally think. But to have that ability be the only cost is important, is the best, right? The best sack outlets are ones where it's simply sacrifice a creature and then some effect happens. Your Ashnod's altars and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, we said earlier, the type of permanent matters a lot, right? So most of these abilities you're going to find on creatures, but since creatures are so easily dealt with, they're not always necessarily the best sack outlets to be dealing with. Now, they are if you want a lot of creatures. Like in a Carador deck, for example, you do want all your sacrifice outlets to be on creatures because you can recast them from your graveyard, and a lot of your stuff deals with creatures. Being able to sacrifice itself sometimes is actually really helpful for a sack outlet. So you actually don't want a lot of ones that say sacrifice another creature. That's not as good, because being able to sacrifice itself, again, to get rid of those exile effects. But it's also very nice to have the odd enchantment or artifact, because they're just tougher to remove, tougher to deal with.
Yeah, for sure. So since we're talking about different permanent types, different ways to get our sack outlets, Andy and I are going to go over, for each of the major permanent types, we're going to go over a couple of sack outlets that we like and why we like them. We're going to show you a variety of them. This is not necessarily just the best that there are. These are just a couple that we like. But if you're using Scryfall, a convenient way to look for it is with just, if you use the search for the Oracle text in quotes, sacrifice a creature. And then just browse with any kind of like color restrictions, like permanent restrictions, anything you want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with one, and then I'm going to name another one. I'm going to cheat a little bit.
Okay.
But I'm going to say Viscera Seer is probably my favorite, but it's also probably the hands down, like, agreed upon best creature sack outlet on a creature. It's 1 mana for a 1/1 that says sacrifice a creature and scry 1. It's 1
because it's the cheapest to bring out as well.
It's so cheap. You can play it and then do so much other stuff, whether it's playing other creatures, paying for activated abilities, and so on. You get to scry 1 with every sack outlet. That's not nothing. Like, that's very helpful. So you can be digging into your deck, finding an answer or something like that, if you're sacrificing a lot of stuff. But at any rate, you're getting a pretty great value for very low cost. And it's a 1/1 creature. It can sacrifice itself. It's got all the things you want. This one gets played in some modern decks and things like that. Like, whenever one of those competitive formats needs a sack outlet, Viscera Seer is often the one you'll see pop up. I also wanted to mention, though, quickly, Cartel Aristocrat, which is white and black for a 2/2 that says sacrifice another creature. Cartel Aristocrat gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So whereas the sacrificing another creature isn't quite as good because you can't sacrifice itself, the fact that it gets protection from a color is often enough to make it to be, it kind of evens out, right? So if someone targets this with an exile effect, you can't sack it, but you can sacrifice something else and then give Cartel Aristocrat Pro whatever color is targeting it. So it's actually pretty good. It protects itself nicely, and you want a sack outlet that has some amount of protection built in. This is a good one.
Great. I'm going to highlight a sack outlet that is not the cheapest, but we're talking about getting better effects for your sacrificing. I'm going to talk about Quagmire Druid. Quagmire Druid is 2 and a black. It's a zombie druid, and it's for the price of a green and a tap. So this is not free, and you only get to do 1 creature. So we're not going to be able to save an entire team of creatures from exile or anything like that. And it says destroy target enchantment. So this is very useful enchantment removal. It's repeatable enchantment removal. I like that. This is an example of a creature that has a very high effect from the sacrifice, but a very restricted kind of cost. Like, you only get to do it once per turn, and it costs you a green. I also have to point out that if there are no valid targets, you're not allowed to do this ability. So there are some board states where, like, you won't even get to sacrifice it. But as far as repeatable enchantment destruction, I think this is phenomenal.
Yeah, it's definitely good for the effect you're seeing on it is great, actually. That's really strong. I think that there are obviously, just as a catch-all sack outlet, it's not that good because if there are no enchantments, you can't even do it, which stinks, right?
Right.
So that, but like, I like that, like that's highlighting just another type where you're more leaning on what the actual sack outlet itself is doing, which I think is great. So let's take a look at artifacts. So artifacts, there's two like very obvious artifacts that everyone kind of runs, and it's because they're just so strong. One of them is really expensive. We just saw a reprint for Exane Altar, and Ashnod's Altar is the other one. Ashnod's Altar, the 3 mana artifact that when you sack a creature, it gives you 2 colorless mana. You'll hear Ashnod's Altar talked about the most, I think, of any sack outlet, especially when it comes to artifacts. This is the number one guy. This is the one everyone runs. It's great. It's ramp. It's free. It's part of combos because of that colorless mana that it's creating. It's really great. But I also wanted to mention another one, Culling Dais, which is 2 mana for an artifact that you tap it and sack a creature to put a charge counter on it, and then you can pay 1 colorless and sacrifice the Culling Dais itself to draw a card for each charge counter on Culling Dais. This is a card that I routinely see. I haven't included it in many decks, but I routinely see it, and I see it paying off in big ways for people, and I'm always like, this is the type of card you want as that catch-all in a deck that's not completely based around sacrificing creatures, right? Because this one is like the odd one guy you'll need to sacrifice because someone's trying to grab it. Bam, hit it with a Culling Dais. In a turn or two, if you've done 1 or 2 other ones, draw a couple cards off of it. Like, that's perfect. That's exactly what you want. So this also represents card draw as well as protecting some of your creatures.
Yeah, so we see a nice balance of like what you get from it versus what it costs. Yeah. Having to tap means you get 1 per turn, but yeah, as long as we're not in a super big emergency, that's pretty decent protection.
Yeah.
One of my favorite artifacts is Spawning Pit. 2 for an artifact, and it's got that free unlimited sacrifice for no cost, which we love. By doing so, though, you get very little. All you do is put a charge counter on it. However, we can pay 1 and remove 2 charge counters to get a 2/2 colorless spawn artifact creature token. I think Spawning Pit's best synergy is in the world where so the reason we want a free sack outlet is so that we can tap out and not worry about it. But in the event that we've left 1 mana open, if our opponents try to wrath the board, we get to get rid of all of our creatures, and we're going to get a creature back before our next turn begins by getting rid of 2 of those counters. The more mana we have available, the more of those counters we can convert back into creatures and rebuild from a wrath quite quickly.
Amazing. And I think I thought there were oddly I thought there were more artifact sack outlets than there were enchantment sack outlets, but I am wrong about that, I think, because when I looked, there were so many. And 2 of my favorites, we talk about one on the show a lot, so I'm not going to totally focus on it, but it's called Fanatical Devotion. It's a white. It always surprises us when we talk about it because it's a white sack outlet and it's an enchantment. And it lets you sack a creature and then regenerate a creature. So I love this because it's a form of protection, but also it's a sack outlet. It's really great. But the one I really wanted to talk about and highlight, I think it's a pretty underrated card in EDH, is Vampiric Rites. It's 1 black for an enchantment, and you pay 1 and a black to sack a creature. So the payment, I do prefer the free ones, but once in a while you find one of these that's, I think, really worth it. You pay 1 and a black, sack a creature, and you gain a life and draw a card. So this can enable a lot of things. This can be some pretty sweet card draw in any kind of token strategy or sacrifice strategy. The instance of life gain can really be great in those drain decks where you gain a life, they lose a life, and you have effects like that going on. So I really like Vampiric Rites. I think it's a pretty good one.
Oh, great. And then one of my favorite enchantment-based sack outlets is Evolutionary Leap. It's the 1 and a green enchantment. We can use it unlimited times a turn, but it costs us 1 green per use. We could sacrifice a creature, and then we reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal another creature card, and that goes into your hand, and the rest gets shuffled out of the bottom. So this is a straight, you're going to get more creatures out of this. If your opponents try to do something to your creatures, you're just going to turn it into another creature. So you Evolutionary Leap keeps you moving ahead. And of course, you can just use it if you don't need to, if you just want to.
It's a great one. I love it. So yeah, sack outlets. There's a variety of reasons to include these in your decks. Don't just think of them as purely, necessary for graveyard strategies or a sacrificing strategy, period. Like, some are just going to give you card advantage, and some are just going to get you out of jam. Some are going to help protect your creatures. Some are going to ramp you. There are many reasons to include many of these cards in your decks, and I think it's a smart move.
Run them.
Big thanks to all our patrons who make these episodes possible.
Yeah, and if you want to check out more comedy videos, check out our Brews News playlist.
Make sure you follow us on Twitch TV to see when we play live.
If you want to chat with us, head over to Twitter. We're at Commanders Brew.
And please hit subscribe to ding the bell and find out when we got new stuff coming out.
See you next time.
Bye.